How's it going, everyone? My name is Falling Hurts, and if you've clicked on this video, you're here for my Trek to Yomi review. Now, full disclosure, get it out of the way now, I will not be using my gameplay during this video. I would love to say it's just for the fact that no spoilers, which is very true. You will not get any more spoilers than the trailers that have already been shown. However, strictly speaking, this along with my Metroid Dread review are both console reviews. So therefore, I just don't have an Elgato capture card, and I don't feel like just uploading clips to my phone and taking them over. That's boring. So yeah, pretty much that's it. Anyways, let's hop right into the review. Trek to Yomi is a pretty interesting game in a lot of ways. Coming from Flying Wild Hog as the developer and Devolver Digital as the publisher, there's a lot of things I can praise, but also a lot of things I have major issues with. First off, I want to talk about the visuals because I think that's one of the biggest things that sets the game apart. And to get the basis down, it's for the most part, a 2D side-scrolling game with melee and some projectile combat, but I'll get into that later. For right now, I want to focus on the two camera angles. There are the side-scrolling combat segments, as well as the very scripted fixed camera angle spectacle moments that follow you around that feature a kind of tank control, where you'll be looking for upgrades to health and stamina, as well as collectibles and also projectile ammo. And really the only thing I have to say about the camera of the game is that sometimes during the combat, on bridges especially, which the game loves to let you cross, it does zoom out a bit too much at certain points, especially during one-on-one really high spectacle moments where it really wants you to take it all in. It's hard to complete that combat at times, especially on a TV that's further away. Now for the most part, I would say that the camera as it follows you around with the fixed angles and different things, it's really interesting seeing all of the camera work involved in all the different angles that you'll see your character from and the world that it shows off. And it usually plays to the game's visual strengths, and that's to my next point, the environment as well as the black and white coloring scheme. I was a little worried at first that black and white wasn't the right choice. As it is a big homage to old samurai films, I understood where it was coming from, but I was really worried that with everything being black and white, it would be really hard to figure out where I was going, with everything being 50 Shades of Grey. However, after playing, I can confirm that much like the girl from that movie, I had absolutely no trouble getting to my climax. But I will say that while I had no trouble finding my way throughout the levels, it did make finding the collectibles and the health upgrades really easy to miss sometimes, as there is a slight glint over the items that you can pick up. It's not always easy to see, especially with the film grain filter over the screen. Sometimes it looks like just a speck of film grain, and I've went out of my way to look for collectibles that aren't there just as much as I've missed ones that were. And of course, this game is 3D, as the camera angles do change, and in the in-game cutscenes, we do get up-close looks at the character models, and that's where I think the visual style falls apart just a little bit. The character models of, say, a spirit potentially later on in the game, which I'm sorry, that is a minor spoiler, but it is making up a good 2/3 of the game, so I'll say it here. They don't look good, they look like something from the 360 era, but it just doesn't look really particularly good, and it's something that upon closer inspection of all 3D models up close, it doesn't really translate super well. I would have wished they kept it a step back and honestly eliminated the up close cutscenes for the most part. And one final bit I'll talk about with the visuals is actually the environments themselves. You find yourself in a few different ones throughout the course of the game, but unfortunately, I think they all do blend together a bit. The few distinct different ones don't really bring that much and all feel like they overstay their welcome. It's not until the end of the game when you see the very different environments all meshed together through one segment that you really think that you've actually been to different locations. Again, this is fine, and with the length of the game, it's overall forgivable, but it really does seem like it drags on, and honestly, this could be from the black and white filter. Yet again, maybe color would have helped here to some degree. Now with the visuals out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about the other major component of the game, and that is of course the gameplay itself. As I've already went over, there's a couple forms of traversal throughout the game. Between the 2D and the 3D, both are pretty okay as far as visuals, but let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the gameplay. Going into the 2D plane, you'll fight many different types of enemies. As much as I hate to say it, most of them, much like the environments, feel very similar. There are a few exceptions. There are a few projectile and ranged enemies that really do draw the player's attention, as they need to be dealt with first. But there are quite a few issues with the combat. First off, as you're playing through the game, you'll unlock new abilities and different combos and things like that. Unfortunately for the gameplay itself, the way the enemies are balanced and handled, you're always using the best option to take them out. So I found myself reusing the same combo and the same specific attacks again and again to take out the same enemies, with very little exception. Another issue I had with the combat was I found multiple instances, and if I was able to record this clip, I will be putting it in here, where enemies basically have to attack you on that same 2D plane, but they will be kind of waiting for you off of the track. So therefore, the enemies can kind of get confused sometimes if they're supposed to run from you or get into the train and attack you, pretty much, as they can only attack you from two directions, not from front or back, just from left and right. So pretty immersion breaking as far as that's concerned, but I only really came across that in one segment, and that was in the second to last chapter of the game. As for the actual weapons you'll be using themselves, you have of course your katana for your melee, which you'll be using multiple different combos with, as well as also your projectiles, which are dedicated to one button, but you can switch between the kind of gun, the bow, or the shoryukens, each of which have their own uses, and overall you'll be always looking for more ammunition to use on those harder enemies. But speaking of harder enemies, one of the highlights of the combat is actually the boss enemies. Unfortunately, I don't feel there's enough in the game, but they're all really cool spectacles, and usually pretty fun to fight, with one exception. I won't go into who that is or which one that is, but I'll let you find that out for yourself if you're going to play. But my final issue with the combat, as I circle back around for just a second, is that all of the combos and all of the attacks use a pretty good amount of the controller's buttons. However, that gets a little crowded as you go on, and especially with the directional use of certain attacks, it really does feel clunky, and that doesn't help with the game's difficulty. The game in and of itself isn't super difficult, but it can be when you get overwhelmed, and when the controller seemingly is working against you a lot of the time, forcing you yet again to use your one trusty old combo. And while I didn't like the combat as much, and I already talked about how the exploration is fine, it's nothing crazy, but you will miss a few things, unless you're probably following a guide, there is one other bit of gameplay that I felt came in just a little bit late for my liking, but did help the experience overall, as the game is very samey and boring after just a couple chapters. And that is actually the puzzles. There are a few different types of environmental puzzles that you'll find throughout Trek to Yomi, and they're all really interesting. They're really simple to figure out, but they're easy and engaging, and it kind of spreads out the minutia of the combat as well as the exploration. It's really cool, and they always come along with a really neat spectacle that shows off how pretty the game actually can be, but unfortunately they're just not used early enough. And with that being said, I have a lot of thoughts that I'll summarize in just a minute, but one final bit I'd like to talk about is actually the story. Trek to Yomi plays it pretty safe. The samurai story is a really simple one, but one ultimately of balance, something that you'll get hammered home, especially in the last couple chapters as you continue your journey. What I will say though is that it goes places that I didn't really expect at first, but something that ultimately is really cliche at the end of the day. Nothing really to write home about, but tonally it was really cool. Ultimately, I don't have much more to say about this, and I'm not going to waste your time talking out of my ass, but the voice performances seemed really good. It was all in Japanese, so I don't know for sure. I mean, he could have been saying wet hot dogs the whole time. I don't really know, but it sounded good. It sounded emoteful. It sounded, I don't know, right, from what I know. You know, I don't even watch anime. But really, that's all I thought about the story. To summarize, I thought the story was pretty cliche and not boring, but never really anything super crazy. But it did act as a proper vessel for the rest of the game to show through, between the pretty good visual style that does fall short as far as variety is concerned, as well as the somewhat lackluster combat that can be learned and somewhat mastered, although the game does come against itself a lot of the times. This is where I come down to my final verdict. I think Trek to Yomi is an okay game. I don't think it's amazing, but I don't outwardly think it's bad either. It's got a pretty nice little message that it does actually give the player some agency for. Without going into too much spoilers, I think it's a pretty complete package. With the price of $20, I don't really know that it's worth it. I don't really think so. However, if you can play it on Game Pass, I definitely recommend a playthrough there. You're not out anything, and it's a pretty overall enjoyable experience for all that it is. As far as PC or any other platform where you're going to be purchasing, I definitely recommend waiting till at least probably $15, if not less, at like $10. You're not going to get a lot of replay value out of it, and looking at the achievements, it doesn't look like something that's going to be very much fun. To 100%, I mean. I should have made that clear. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Trek to Yomi. I really hate to be so negative, but a lot of times I came out of my play sessions feeling frustrated, mostly due to the way the combat felt at times, and it definitely did make me set the controller down more than once. This game is frustrating at times, and it does things that aren't always great with the combat. However, it was still an enjoyable experience enough to carry me through the whole 7-ish hours that I played. Anyways, my name is Falling Hearts. Thank you so much for watching this review, and I'm actually just now a new subscriber to Xbox Game Pass, so look forward to shorter, easier, non-spoilery reviews like this in the future, as well as the normally scheduled programming that's on the channel. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, go ahead and share it. Yeah, go ahead and subscribe. Bye.